Hi, I'm Sam from GForce, and this is the Oberheim OB-1. In this video, I'll be walking you through every feature of the synthesizer, enabling you to master it for use in your own productions. OB-1 is, of course, based on the original Oberheim OB-1, released in 1978, and we've worked with Oberheim to augment and expand that synth's capabilities into something modern and unique. OB-1 is built around two oscillators with wave shaping and complex modulation routing possibilities. There's a mixer which features sub-oscillator and noise inputs, a filter with lots of character that can get nicely aggressive, envelopes for the VCF and the VCA, and a host of control options. We've added our X modifiers, allowing an LFO and ADSR for almost all parameters, and 4 effects: a high-pass filter, chorus, delay, and reverb. There's a creative sequencer with independent lane lengths and a lane dedicated to a macro, and of course our macros have been added as well. OB-1 is provided with over 300 patches, the first one being this, Bigu Robu. Changing patches in OB-1 is as simple as clicking the up and down arrows next to the patch title in the header bar. If you wish to have more control, you can click the title itself or the icon to the left of the title to open the browser. And simply selecting based on category, type or timbre, with the ability to easily search for patches as well. Let's init our patch so we can explore the synth in more detail. Let's have a look at OB-1's oscillators. Both oscillators feature coarse and fine frequency tuning. The coarse frequency tuning goes from plus 24 semitones down to minus 24 semitones. While the fine tune goes from plus 7 semitones down to minus 7 semitones. There are 3 selectable waveform modes for each oscillator, and each of these 3 modes contains wave shaping. Our first one is a triangle wave through to a sawtooth. Our second one is a ramp wave through to a sine wave. And our final one is a pulse with pulse width modulation from narrow to wide. Underneath these, we have the 2 modulation controls, one for the frequency and one for the waveform shaping. In Oscillator 1, these can be assigned to the LFO or the VCF envelope. In Oscillator 2, they can be assigned to the LFO or the VCA envelope. All controls are bipolar. In between the 2 oscillators, we have a sync function and a crossmod function. When turning this knob, we introduce an amount of crossmod. At 100%, this matches the original OB-1 hardware. Combining sync, crossmod, waveform and frequency modulation, you can create an incredibly wide range of tones from each oscillator. With our oscillators set up, let's have a look at OB-1's mixer. The mixer allows us to introduce a sub-oscillator for each of our two main oscillators, as well as noise. The noise features a knob to morph between white or pink variants. At the bottom of the mixer, we have a switch for the VCA. This determines whether the envelope affects the amplitude of the VCA, or whether the VCA switches on and off based on whether a key is pressed. This allows us to use the VCA envelope for other duties if required. With our mixer set up, let's move on to the VCF. The VCF contains two frequency controls, one coarse and one fine, a resonance control, variable keyboard tracking up to 100%, and similarly to the VCOs, LFO and envelope modulation controls that are bipolar. At the bottom of the VCF there's a switch to choose between 2-pole and 4-pole mode. Let's have a listen to the filter in some different settings now. As you can hear, the filter heads into self-resonance quite easily. Let's have a listen to that now. Now that we're happy with our VCF settings, we can have a look at the envelopes. We have two standard attack, decay, sustain, release or ADSR envelopes, one for the VCF and one for the VCA. What makes these unique is their looping capabilities. There are three modes here, either off with no looping, retrig, which resets the phase of a looping envelope every time a note is pressed. And free, in which the envelopes loop in a free-running manner, their phase not being reset when a note is pressed. The attack and decay segments act as the looping area of the envelope. The envelope proceeds through its attack stage up to its maximum amplitude, then down through its decay stage to the sustain point, at which it loops. You can alter the sustain level to give your looping envelope a different character. Using the combination of these envelopes and the LFO to modulate the oscillators and filter is the key to unlocking OB-1's deep and powerful sound design capabilities. Let's have a look at the controls to the left of the main synthesizer, starting with the LFO. We have two knobs, one for delay and one for rate. The delay controls how long it'll take for the LFO to take effect, while the rate controls the speed of the LFO. Using the sync switch below determines whether the timing of the two LFO knobs are set freely or whether they're derived from a master clock. In the centre we have a three-way wave switch, which allows us to choose the waveform of the LFO between sine, square and sample and hold. Then we have a re-trigger, which determines whether the LFO is free running or will re-trigger every time a key is pressed. Below the LFO we have the keyboard section, which houses a range of controls to determine the playing and sound of the instrument. Starting at the top, we have the portamento, which sets the glide time between notes. To the right of that, we have the hold, which determines whether notes are held when the key is depressed. On the right-hand side of the top row, we have the transpose. This can be set to an octave above or an octave below the default. The row below contains our aftertouch and velocity modulation controls. Each of these features a screen and a knob. We use the screen to select the destination of our modulation and the knob to select the amount. Aftertouch and velocity modulation can be stacked, so you can select multiple destinations and send differing amounts of modulation to each. Right-clicking on a screen shows you all available destinations and the amount of modulation applied. The third row of the keyboard section contains unison and spread controls. Unison is applied by clicking its switch and is detuned using the knob. Its voice count is determined by the polyphony. Spread controls the spread of voices within the stereo field. There are two modes. Voices can be placed either randomly or around the centre point. The knob controls the amount of spread. The bottom row contains master controls for OB-1. We have a vintage knob which applies aging across the synthesizer, a volume knob which sets the master output level of OB-1. We have the voice type, which can be set between mono, legato or poly, and we have the number of polyphonic voices, up to 16. Below the keyboard section we have the bend lever and its associated controls. The bend lever has 4 destinations. It can be sent to both VCOs, to VCO2 only, to both VCOs but VCO2 is inverted, or it can use the original Oberheim OB-1 modulation settings. That being, if you push the lever upwards, you introduce LFO frequency modulation, and if you push the lever downwards, you introduce noise modulation. There's a pitch bend range setting, which goes up to 48 semitones, and a lock for that setting, which means your pitch bend range will carry over between patch changes. Now that we've covered the main panel of OB-1, let's have a look at the extended section, which features XMods and effects. Any parameter you click that has a red square around it can have its own dedicated XADSR and XLFO assigned to it. The XLFO has a number of features for deep sound design. Let's start in the top left. We have retrig to determine whether the XLFO will retrigger every time a key is pressed. Sync to determine whether the rate is tied to master clock or is free. Then we have a range of shapes to choose from the XLFO. We have sine, triangle, ramp up, ramp down, square, unipolar square, brown noise, and random. Moving over to the sliders, we have an amount which determines the amount of LFO modulation applied to the parameter. As you turn this up, the parameter will start to glow red to give you visual feedback of how much modulation is being applied. We then have the time slider, which determines the rate of the LFO. We have a delay, which determines how long it'll take for the LFO to fade in. We have sample and hold, which applies sample and hold to the LFO. We have smoothing of the final LFO shape, and we have a phase offset of the LFO. I've built a patch that features a looping VCF envelope. I'm going to apply XLFOs to the attack and decay of that envelope so that it changes over time. Let's move over to the XADSR. The XADSR is an envelope that can be applied to many parameters, just like the XLFO. We have controls of the amplitude or amount of that envelope that's applied to the chosen parameter, the effect of velocity on that amplitude, and then we have the envelope controls themselves: attack, decay, sustain start, sustain time, and the release. Envelope timings adhere to whether synchronization is set in the XLFO. I've applied some XADSR to my sub-oscillator level, so let's have a listen. Between the two XMods, we have the selected parameter screen, which shows which parameter we're currently editing, and 3 buttons: copy, paste, and clear. These allow me to copy my modulation to a different parameter, paste modulation from a parameter, or clear all the modulation applied to a parameter. Let's copy and paste this sub-oscillator modulation to a few different destinations. Now that our patch is taking shape, we can look at adding some effects. OB-1 comes with 4 effects: a high-pass filter, a chorus, a delay, and a reverb. Each of the effects features a bypass button and a lock button. When the lock button is enabled, FX settings are locked and cannot be edited. They will be persistent across patch changes as well. Let's look at the high-pass filter first. It features a fixed amount of resonance and has controls for coarse and fine frequency, keyboard tracking up to 100%, and a mode switch that allows you to select between 2 and 4 poles. Next is the chorus. This features 4 modes and has controls for depth, rate, and the amount of chorus applied. Moving on to the delay, we have controls for the time of the left and right delays. These can be linked using a button below. We also have a button for crossfeed and synchronization, which determines whether the time knobs are synced to the master clock or operate in milliseconds. We have controls for modulation frequency and depth, a high-pass filter to the feedback, feedback itself, and an amount of delay. The final effect is the reverb. This features pre-delay, size and decay controls, frequency modulation and depth again, a filter and a mix control. There are 5 presets: slapback, small, medium, large, and huge. OB-1's versatile and powerful effects add an extra dimension to its already deep sound design. OB-1 comes with 4 macros, which allow you to control multiple parameters from a single knob. Assigning parameters to control is simple. Click on the plus and drag it. Any parameter that has a green indicator can be controlled by a macro. Release over that parameter to assign. You can then right-click and drag on that parameter to determine the modulation amount. Every time you assign a parameter to a macro, the number increases in the destination window. Clicking on the destination window shows all of your currently assigned parameters. You can see how much modulation has been applied, remove each one individually, or click Remove All. I'm going to assign some macro values to this patch and use the knob to change its character. OB-1 also comes with an arpeggiator and sequencer. You can open these by either clicking the icon in the header or the switch just above the keyboard. Let's look at the arpeggiator first. It has controls for rate, swing, octave, which goes to +2 octaves or -2 octaves, and 4 different modes, those being up, down, up, down, and random. Switching over to the sequencer, we have lanes for pitch, velocity, and one for macro 4, allowing you to sequence parameter modulations. Each lane also features independent length controls, allowing you to create complex evolving sequences with just a few clicks. Starting with the pitch lane, we have a scale screen, which allows you to quantize the note output of the sequencer to a given scale. We have options for major, harmonic, melodic, and natural scales. Next, we have the randomize function. Here you can set the lower range, the upper range, and randomize your sequence. Each step in the pitch lane has a knob and screen which you can use to manually set your note. Moving to the velocity lane, we have a knob for overall note length. The same randomization controls as on the pitch lane, this time using velocity values instead of notes. A knob on each of the steps to set the velocity of that step. And a probability for each step of whether that note is triggered. On the macro lane, we have a guide knob, which determines how long it takes to transition from one value to the next within a step. We also have the same randomization controls. And then a value knob for each step. In terms of sequencer controls, we have access to the same 4 knobs from the Arpeggiator, those being rate, swing, octave, and mode, as well as the state switch, which allows us to determine whether the sequencer only plays when a key is pressed, holds after the key is pressed, or will cycle regardless of whether a key is pressed. We then have a record button to record in external MIDI notes. A reset button. And a MIDI drag and drop, which allows us to take our sequence and drag it directly into our DAW. Let's have a look at the settings available in OB-1. If you're using the plugin in a DAW, you'll see the following. In the top right, we have a link to the manual, which will open in your browser. Then we have options for oversampling, from 2 times to 6 times. Allow tail off on host transport stop, which can be turned on or off. Maximum internal buffer size, which you can set between better quality and better performance. Patch browser font scale. Tooltip timeout length in seconds. Macro amount adjustment modifier, where you can choose between the default of right click, command or control, and alt. A smooth VCO tune adjustment modifier, in which you can choose the default of command or control, right click or alt, and whether or not to enable poly pitch bend. When using the plugin in standalone mode, you'll see a number of extra settings, allowing you to configure the audio inputs, outputs, and MIDI. Firstly, we have the audio output and the ability to select the active output channels. Then we have the sample rate of the plugin. the audio buffer size, any active MIDI inputs, and the active MIDI channel. Let's have a look at the browser in a bit more depth. We can open the browser by clicking the icon in the header bar, or by clicking the name of the patch. We can initialize an instance of the plugin by clicking Init Patch in the bottom left-hand corner. We can select a random patch by clicking Random in the bottom right-hand corner. Let's favourite a couple of patches. We can now click on the Sort Patches icon in the top right and choose to sort by favourites. At the top of the list, we'll see our favourites first. We can also sort by A to Z, Z to A, or alpha patches first. There are a number of filters we can use to hone in on the sound that we want. We can select the category, then we can select the type, and then we can select the timbre. We'll then only see patches that are relevant to those tags. We also have OR and sorting for timbres and types. When OR is selected, holding Command or Control will allow you to select multiple types or timbres, and you'll see any patch that applies to all of your selections. When AND is selected, choosing multiple types or timbres will only show those which match the entirety of your selection. Let's have a look at collections. We can create a collection by clicking on the Save icon to the right of the title bar, going to the collection input in the bottom left, typing in the collection we want to add, and clicking the plus icon. We can also do this for categories, types, and timbres as we see fit. With the collection created, anytime we save a patch, we can choose to add it to that collection. When it comes to importing a collection of patches, we click the folder icon in the top left of the load window and click Import down in the bottom right. We can then browse to the file and load it. We're also able to export collections from here. We simply select the collection from the list above, click Export, choose where we want to put it, and save. I've created a patch here, and now I want to save it. Again, I click on the Save icon to the right of the title. Here I can input the name, the author, notes on the patch, information on the macros, as well as selecting a title for the macro. Choose my collection, category, type, and timbre, and then simply click Save. Let's have a look at CC mapping. To do this, I just click the CC icon in the bottom right, and I can see every parameter that can have CC assigned to it. I select a parameter, and then I send the CC that I wish to control it with. I can clear my CC mappings either individually or all at once. OB-1 also features undo and redo. I can perform these actions in the bottom right hand corner of the plugin window. That just about covers everything in OB-1. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. We really appreciate your support, and we hope you enjoy using this plugin as much as we do.